The night saoirse hollowvale was entered into the trial of the Lunahim, the snow in the Thornfen Valley fell in a way the elders would later swear they had seen only once before. In the winter, a goddess was rumored to have walked the ridge and left no footprints. It fell slow. It fell straight. It fell as if the sky itself were holding its breath to listen. What saoirse did not know, kneeling in the cold stone antechamber of the mortuary hall with a dead child's hands folded between her own, was that every flake hitting the slate roof above her was timing itself to a pulse already beating inside her ribs. A pulse that had been placed there before she had been old enough to remember, and that by the next moonrise, a king 3 kingdoms wide would be on his knees in front of her because of it. She did not know that the woman who had placed that pulse inside her was at that very moment adjusting the sleeve of a gown in the capital, 3 days' ride south, smiling at a mirror the way a hunter smiles at a snare. She did not know any of it. She only knew the child's hands were cold, and that she had been told to wash them before the burning, and that somewhere above her the horns of an arriving royal procession were sounding, low and long, the way horns sound when a king has come to take something away. She pressed her forehead to the child's knuckles. She could not say a prayer aloud. She had never been able to say anything aloud. Her throat, from the first breath she had drawn, had been a chamber with no bell. Her mother, so the pack whispered, had looked into the cradle, seen a baby who did not cry, and understood at once that the mother moon had refused to breathe a soul into this one. Her mother had died of grief before saoirse was weaned. Her father had remarried a woman named Iseult, and Iseult had given the pack 2 loud, bright daughters, and had folded saoirse into the corners of the household, like a tablecloth no one had the heart to throw away, but no one wanted on the table. At 24, saoirse had no rank, no pack name inked into the registry beside her surname, no assigned mate, no place at the bonfire, and one trade. She tended the dead. She washed their hair. She closed their eyes. She arranged their hands. She carried the small bodies when the grown ones could not bear to, and she carried the grown bodies when the small ones begged her to stay. It was considered the silent work, fitting for a silent girl, and she had learned in all those years that the dead were the only members of the pack who did not flinch when she came close. A shadow moved across the doorway. Iseult's shadow was always first, and her voice was always second, because Iseult's voice arrived the way a blade arrives, edge forward. "Up, girl. Wash your hands. You've been entered." Saoirse lifted her head slowly. She did not understand. She tilted it in the way that had become her word for what. Iseult smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who had remembered a loophole in a law and could not wait to pull it. "The trial," she said, and let the word hang so saoirse would feel it land. "Every unmated female of marriageable age is required to stand before the Alpha King and sing the Luna hymn. Required. No exceptions made for defect." She said the last word gently, the way someone lays a flower on a coffin. "I've signed the roster for all 3 of my daughters, including you." Saoirse stood so quickly the child's hand slid out of her own. She shook her head. She shook it again. She made the shape of the word no with her lips, because that much her lips could do. Iseult only widened her smile. "You'll stand. You'll open your mouth. You'll be looked at by a king. And when nothing comes out, the court will see, finally, that the goddess's verdict was never cruelty, only truth. Then, my girl, Perhaps the pack will stop pretending you belong in a house. She turned in the doorway. Wear the gray, the one that fits you poorly. It suits you. The horns outside sounded again. Saoirse stood with her hands open at her sides, feeling the pulse in her chest, the one she had never named, tick once, firmly, like a key turning in a lock she had not known was on her. They dressed her in the gray. Isolde made sure the hem dragged. Isolde made sure the shoulders hung wrong. Isolde made sure the belt was cinched at a height that robbed Saoirse of any grace she might accidentally have possessed. And when she was done, she stepped back and regarded Saoirse the way a farmer regards a crop that has failed in an interesting way. Then she swept out to dress her own daughters in crimson and gold. The great hall of Thornfen had been scrubbed 3 times for the king's arrival, and the long windows had been unboarded for the first time in a season, and the firelight across the old stone made the carvings of the ancestor wolves seem to prowl along the upper walls as if they too had come to watch. Saoirse walked the corridor at the back of the line of unmated women, because the pack had not known where to place her in a procession built around rank, and had decided, by default, that last was where she went. Her best and only friend, a baker's apprentice named Nyla with flour perpetually in the seam of her sleeve and a mouth that would not stop even under oath, fell in beside her and linked arms like a guard locking a gate. "I'm going to kill her," Nyla said under her breath, not looking at Isolde's retreating back. "I'm going to kill her and bake her into a pie, and I'm going to feed the pie to her own goats. Do you think goats eat pie? I think goats would eat pie." Saoirse squeezed her arm. It was the only way she could say thank you for being here and please don't kill anyone today. Nyla understood, as she always did. She had been translating Saoirse's silences since they were 7. "Listen to me," Nyla whispered, slowing them both near the high carved doors. "You walk in. You stand. You open your mouth the way you always do when Isolde tells you to do something impossible. You wait the 3 beats they require. You close your mouth. You walk out. He is a king, and he is bored, and he has already rejected every woman in 3 valleys. He will not even look at you. And then you come home, and we eat bread with butter, and we never speak of this, and I will personally burn that gray dress." Saoirse nodded. She believed her. She wanted to believe her. She did not know that in the antechamber beyond the doors, standing just behind the throne in a deep emerald cloak with silver thread at the collar, was a woman named Chanel Vormain, the king's own first counselor, who had served at his father's side and at his side since he had taken the crown, and who had, 24 winters ago, knelt over a cradle in the Thornfen Valley with a vial of silver dust and a tuning fork, and laid a song into the chest of a newborn girl because she had known, even then, what rite this king would have to perform one day, and what it would cost him if the voice he was seeking could not be handed to him by someone who wanted something from him in return. The doors opened. The hall was full. The king sat on a chair that had been brought from the capital in pieces and reassembled, its high back carved with a wolf whose eyes had been set with obsidian and whose mouth was closed. Saoirse saw him before she meant to, because the room pulled her eye to him the way water pulls toward a drain. Caelan Draventhorn was not what she had expected. The stories said Alpha King, and she had imagined something that loomed. He did loom, but not with size, with stillness. He sat without moving. His hands rested on the arms of the chair. His dark hair was tied back at the nape. A long, pale scar crossed his jaw from ear to chin and caught the firelight when he turned his head, which he did now, slowly, to watch the line of women file in. His eyes were the color of a sky just before it becomes a storm. They passed over each face without stopping. They passed over Isolt's daughters. They passed over Nyla. They reached saoirse, and they did not pass. They stopped. His jaw tightened. She felt the tightening in her own chest, as if a string between them had been pulled taut by someone testing it. She looked away. She made herself look away. Behind the throne, in the emerald cloak, Chanel Voramain's lips parted the smallest fraction, and she reached up delicately and touched the silver pin at her throat. And the pulse in saoirse's chest answered the pin like a hound answering a whistle. The trial began in order of rank. Isolt's daughters sang first, one after the other, their voices carefully trained and carefully pretty, and Kaelin listened to each with the patience of a man listening to a clock tick. The hymn was not long. It was 7 lines of old tongue, a call and an answer and a closing vow, and it was the same in every woman's mouth because the words were sacred and fixed. What was not fixed was the resonance beneath the words, the thing the king's wolf was listening for, and one by one he shook his head, small and courteous and absolutely final. The older daughter took it well. The younger did not. She bit her lip until it bled and was led from the hall by her mother. And Isolt did not look at saoirse when she passed, because Isolt was saving the look for afterward, when it would hurt more. Nyla sang. Nyla sang beautifully, in fact, better than anyone had expected, and for a moment the hall went still, and saoirse's heart rose, because if it were Nyla, then Nyla would be queen, and saoirse could disappear back into the mortuary and the thing would be done. Kaelin listened. Kaelin closed his eyes. Kaelin opened them and shook his head, and his face, for the first time, was something close to regretful, as if he were sorry to have made Nyla stand up for nothing. Nyla curtsied the way she curtsied at the bakery when a customer tipped, which was to say, sarcastically, and stepped down. Then the herald called the name that had been added last to the roster. saoirse Hollowvale, of no rank, of Thornfen. A ripple went through the hall. The pack knew. The pack had always known. Heads turned. Someone, a cousin 3 rows back, laughed before they could stop themselves, and the laugh cut off in the middle because Kaelin's head turned, and Kaelin's eyes found the laugher, and the laugh died in the laugher's throat. Kaelin's eyes came back to the center. They found saoirse. They did not move. "Come forward," he said, and his voice was low and rough and very quiet, and it carried as if the room had been built only to hold it. Saoirse's feet moved. She did not remember asking them to. She walked the length of the hall in the badly hung gray dress with the dragging hem, and she felt every eye in the room, and she felt the pulse in her chest, which had begun to do something new, which was to hum, actively, with a frequency she could feel in her teeth. She stopped at the mark. She looked up. Up close, Kaelin's eyes were not storm gray. They were the color of a lake under ice. He was looking at her the way a man looks at something he has been told exists, but has never seen. "You know the hymn," he said. It was not a question. It was a courtesy, a warning, an out. She could have shaken her head. She could have ended it there. She did not shake her head. She did not know why. She lifted her chin the smallest fraction. His nostrils flared once, almost imperceptibly. Behind him, Chanel Voramain shifted, and the silver pin at her throat caught the firelight, and the pulse in Saoirse's chest bloomed outward, soft and wide, like a candle catching. "Sing then," Calin said, and his voice cracked very faintly on the word sing, and only someone listening for it would have heard. Saoirse opened her mouth. The hall held its breath. Her throat did what her throat had always done, which was nothing. No sound climbed her windpipe. No note formed on her tongue. Her lungs filled and emptied around a silence as complete as the silence at the bottom of a well. And the air around her, the air between her and the throne, the air trapped in the high stone rafters and pressed against the tall windows and rising through the floorboards, began to sing. It sang in her voice. It sang a voice no one in the pack had ever heard, because no one in the pack had ever heard her voice. And yet every person in the hall knew, at once, in the part of the wolf beneath the skin, that the voice in the air was hers. The first line lifted. The second answered itself. The third opened out into the old tongue's long vowel, a sound like a bell struck underwater, and the carvings on the walls seemed to lean in to hear it. Calin Draventhorn went to his knees. He did not stumble. He did not lurch. He set one knee and then the other onto the stone, with the exact, deliberate motion of a man accepting a verdict that has been owed to him for a long time. And his head bent, and his hands pressed flat to the floor on either side of him, and his shoulders shook once, only once, with the force of something breaking open inside him. The hymn finished. The air went still. Saoirse closed her mouth. Calin, still on his knees, lifted his head. He was looking at her as if she had reached into his chest and set something on fire that he had thought long extinguished. "Mine," he said, and the word was not loud, but the hall heard it, because the hall had been built to hold his voice. "By the old law and the new, mine. Before any objection, before any contract, before any claim prior to this moment, I name her and I take her, and I will answer with my blood for it." Isolde made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a woman makes when a trap she has set closes on her own hand. Behind the throne, Chanel Voramain smiled, small and private, and lowered her hand from the silver pin, and the pulse in Saoirse's chest, having done its work, settled into a deep, steady throb that was no longer quite her own. They took her from the hall in a cloak that smelled of him. Calin had stripped his own outer mantle from his shoulders when he rose from the floor, and had fastened it around hers himself, his hands careful at her throat, careful as if her throat were the hymn and he was afraid of breaking it. She did not flinch. She should have flinched. She flinched at everything, at Isolde's hand on her shoulder, at the baker's dog when it barked, at the wind when it came through the slats of the mortuary window. She did not flinch at him. Her body, which had been raised to make itself small in the presence of powerful things, had reviewed him and had decided, without her permission, that he was not a thing to shrink from. He walked her to the chambers that had been set aside for him in the Thornfen Keep, and he did not touch her again except to open doors, and when they were alone in the antechamber, he turned to her, and he dropped, not to his knees this time, but to one knee, which for a king was still a thing that would have made a bard weep. And he looked up at her the way a man looks up at a window he has been walking past for years, without knowing it was the window of his own house. "Forgive me," he said. His voice was low and rough, the way the stories had said, and she understood now that the roughness was not menace. It was the sound of a voice that had not been allowed to be soft for a very long time. I claimed you in front of a court before I had asked your name from your own mouth. I will not pretend I had a choice. My wolf has been listening for that sound since I was a boy. If I had not spoken, I would have died in that chair. But you had a choice, and I took it. So I am asking now, Saoirse. He said her name the way a priest says a word he has only read and never spoken, with reverence and with fear of mispronouncing it. Will you come with me to the capital? As my mate, as my queen, as yourself, and nothing else I can't earn. She stared at him. She could not answer with sound. He seemed to understand this. He waited. He did not rush her. His hand, the one not braced on his knee, was open at his side, palm up, empty, an offering without an ask. She thought of the mortuary. She thought of the cold hands of the child she had been washing when the horns began. She thought of Isolt's smile in the doorway. She thought of Nyla saying, "We never speak of this," and she knew, with a pain she did not understand, that she would never again sit in a kitchen with Nyla and eat bread with butter, because whatever she answered to this man, her life was no longer the shape it had been an hour ago. She lifted her hand. She set it, very lightly, on his. His breath left him all at once, as if he had been holding it since he had seen her in the line. He closed his eyes. He turned her hand over and pressed his forehead to her knuckles, the way she had pressed her forehead to the child's knuckles only hours earlier. And she felt, through the back of her hand, that he was shaking. "Thank you," he said into her skin. "Thank you. Thank you." She did not know yet that somewhere past the door, Chanel Vormain was writing a letter in a hand so neat it looked printed, sealing it with silver wax and sending it south by a rider who rode only at night. She did not know that the letter said only one line: "It is done." She only knew that a king was kneeling on the floor of a borrowed chamber with his forehead against her hand, and that the pulse in her chest for the first time in her life felt less like something living inside her and more like something that had been put there and had finally been called home. They rode south in the morning. Nyla came with her, because Nyla had marched up to the king's captain and had told him, in a voice that brooked no argument, that the queen would have a lady, and the lady would be her. And if anyone else tried to apply for the post, she would personally put flour in their boots. The king's captain, a man named Raphael with a broken nose and an amused mouth, had looked her up and down and had said, "Done, Baker." On the road, Kaelin rode beside Saoirse. He did not crowd her. He did not speak unnecessarily. When she grew cold, his cloak found her shoulders again without ceremony. When the procession stopped at a stream, he dismounted first and offered his hand to help her down, and she took it. And he did not let go until her feet were sure on the ground, and even then his thumb brushed, once, across her knuckles, as if to confirm she was still there. At one such stop, a small creature came out of the reeds. It was a pup. Not a wolf pup, something smaller and ordinary and half-starved, a farm dog's cast-off with matted fur and a splinter in its paw. It walked, on 3 legs and a stump of courage, directly to Kaelin, past the captains and the guards and the horses, and it sat down on his boot and looked up at him and waited. The entire company went still. Kaelin Draventhorn, Alpha king of 3 kingdoms and rejecter of every trial voice in the realm, sighed the sigh of a man who has just been assigned a new and inescapable duty. He knelt. He eased the splinter from the small paw with hands that had killed men. He set the pup inside his saddlebag with a strip of dried meat and a fold of his own cloak for a bed, and he mounted without a word, and the pup put its chin on the rim of the bag and went to sleep. Saoirse looked at him. He looked at her. He shrugged very faintly, as if to say, "I do not make the rules." The corner of her mouth moved. It was the first time she had smiled in the presence of a man who was not dead. He saw it. He closed his eyes the way a person closes their eyes in front of a sunrise. The capital, Caer Draventhorn, sat on a bluff above a river that ran silver at dawn and black at dusk, and its towers were old in the way that only certain towers are old, which is to say, they were older than the kingdom that had been built around them. They rode in under a gate carved with wolves, whose mouths were closed, like the throne, and Saoirse understood without being told that the closed mouth was an old family sign, and that it meant, in their tongue, the word that cannot be said aloud, which was also, she realized, a kind of name for her. They were met in the inner courtyard by the court. It had assembled quickly. Word had run ahead of them by bird and by rider, and the nobles of the capital had put on their best and their most curious, and they stood in tight clusters under the cold sun and watched the king help a mute girl from a small valley down from her horse as if she were made of something rarer than glass. Among them, at the front, closest to the king's own steps, stood the woman in the emerald cloak. Saoirse saw her and did not know why her chest seized. She had never seen the face before, she was sure of it, and yet the sight of Chanel Voramain produced in her the same sensation she had once experienced as a child when she had put her hand on a stove and pulled it back before her mind had processed the heat. The body knew first. The body always knew first. "My king." Chanel's voice was low and warm and beautifully trained, the voice of a woman who had spent a lifetime being listened to. "And my queen." Her curtsy was immaculate. Her eyes, when they lifted to Saoirse, were kind. They were also, for one flicker, the eyes of a craftsman examining a finished piece for flaws. Only a flicker, then they were kind again. "Welcome home." Kaelin nodded. "Counselor Voramain, you will forgive the haste of the arrangements. There will be a formal presentation at the full moon. Until then, the queen will rest, and she will be shown the house, and she will choose what she wants from it. What she does not choose will be removed." Chanel inclined her head. "As you say." She turned her smile on Saoirse. "My lady, anything you require, anything at all. My door is the second on the west corridor. Do not hesitate." Saoirse inclined her head the smallest fraction. Her pulse, the one in her chest, did something she did not understand. It quieted. It quieted the way a dog quiets when its master walks into the room. She turned her face away quickly so that Kaelin would not see whatever was on it. But Kaelin saw everything, always. And she felt his hand at the small of her back, steady, and she heard him murmur, low, only for her, "Breathe." She breathed. That night, she slept in a room that had belonged to his mother. He had told her this quietly while a maid turned down the bed, and he had told her also that she could have any other room in the keep if this one did not suit. And she had shaken her head, because the room suited her in a way she could not explain. Because the room had a window that faced east, and a small hearth with a stone carved into the lintel, and the carving was of a wolf with its mouth closed. and Saoirse had felt, looking at it, that she had been expected. She did not sleep well. She dreamed of a cradle, and a hand with silver on its fingertips, and a sound being poured into her chest like water into a jar. She woke with the dream still ringing, and she sat up in the unfamiliar dark, and she realized she could hear very faintly the pulse that was not hers. It was humming. It was humming toward the west corridor, toward the second door. In the morning, Kaelin brought her breakfast himself. This was, she would learn, unprecedented, and the entire kitchen staff had reassigned their entire day around it. He set the tray on the low table by the window, and he sat across from her and he watched her eat, as if the sight of her eating were a thing he had missed without knowing. The pup from the road, now named by Nyla without anyone's permission as Gus, sat on Kaelin's boot and waited for crumbs. Nyla, who had been given the adjoining chamber and had already rearranged it twice, stuck her head in and said, "The Queen would like to see the library, and the gardens, and anyone who has ever made her feel small, in that order." Kaelin's mouth moved. It was close to a smile. "In that order." He walked her through the keep. He showed her the library, which was tall and narrow and smelled of cedar. He showed her the gardens, which were winter bare and beautiful in their bones. He showed her the small chapel where his mother had prayed, and he did not tell her what had happened to his mother, and she did not ask. At the threshold of the council chamber, he stopped. "You do not have to go in," he said. "But you should see it once, so the room knows you." She went in. Chanel was there, at the table, bent over a map. She rose at once. She made the same immaculate curtsy. She said, "My queen." And her voice was warm, and Saoirse's pulse went quiet again. That was when Saoirse knew. Not the whole of it. She did not know the whole of it yet, but she knew that the pulse in her chest was not hers, and that Chanel Voramain could make it behave, and that whatever had been done to her in a cradle 24 winters ago had been done by the woman now smiling at her over a map of the kingdom she was about to become queen of. She could not say it. That was the cruelty and the protection of it. She could not tell Kaelin. She could not write it either, not yet, because she did not know what to write. My pulse answers her. My pulse is not mine. My pulse was put in me. He would believe her. She knew, with the kind of knowing that has nothing to do with evidence, that he would believe her the instant she asked him to. That was precisely why she could not yet ask. Because Chanel Voramain had been his mother's counselor and his father's, and had raised him in the years after his mother died, and Saoirse had watched him speak to her with the easy deference a son gives to an aunt who has earned it, and she had seen, in the quick way Chanel had touched his sleeve at the end of the council meeting, that the woman loved him in her way, which was the most dangerous kind of loving, the kind that does not preclude using. Saoirse needed to be sure. So she watched. She watched for 3 days, while the court prepared for the full moon presentation, while seamstresses fitted her in silver and pale gray, while Nyla flirted outrageously with Captain Raphael in the kitchens and reported back on gossip, while Gus, the 3-legged pup, followed Kaelin through the halls like a small furred shadow and was fed unsuitable things by every guard they passed. She watched and she learned. She learned that Chanel went each evening, alone, to a small room off the west corridor that had once been a treaty room and now, officially, held only her private correspondence. She learned that Chanel wore the silver pin always and touched it when she was thinking. She learned that the pulse in Saoirse's chest quickened when Chanel was angry and softened when Chanel was pleased, and dropped almost to nothing when Chanel touched the pin. She learned, most importantly, that Kaelin's own wolf was restless around Chanel in a way Kaelin had not yet noticed. He had told her this himself, in bed, on the second night, when he had asked to share her room and had promised, with the gravity of a man vowing before a priest, that he would sleep above the covers and would not touch her except to hold her hand if she wished it. He had kept the vow. They had lain side by side with the length of a blanket and 1,000 years of wanting between them, and he had held her hand, and he had said drowsily, "My wolf is strange tonight. He paces. He has paced since we came through the gate." She had turned her face toward him in the dark. She had squeezed his hand. He had understood the squeeze as comfort. It had been a warning, and she had not yet known how to make him understand. On the third night, she made him understand another thing. He had not meant to kiss her. She knew this because he had told her, at the door of the chamber, that he would not kiss her until she had been his long enough to know she could say no to him and be obeyed. And she had nodded, and they had gone inside, and Gus had claimed the rug by the fire, and then Kaelin had turned to pull the curtains, and his sleeve had brushed her wrist, and she had, without thinking, caught his sleeve, and he had turned back and looked down at her, and she had lifted onto her toes, and he had bent, because he was a man who understood invitations, and their mouths had found each other in the firelit dark with the careful, disbelieving slowness of two people who had been promised to each other before either of them had been born. He tasted of winter and iron and the faintest trace of the wine at dinner. His hand came up to her jaw and his thumb brushed the corner of her mouth, and he made, against her lips, a sound that was not quite a word, a low, broken syllable that her pulse answered before her heart did. She pressed closer. He let her. He did not grip. He did not take. He let her climb him the way a climbing plant climbs a trellis, slow and sure and her own pace. And when her hands found his collar, he pulled back, the smallest fraction, and rested his forehead against hers. "Saoirse," he said, "if you want this, I will stop pretending I can wait. Tell me." She nodded against his forehead. She nodded once, twice, a third time for certainty. He made the broken syllable again. His hands moved to the laces at her throat. And then, through the door, through the stone, through the long corridor that ran to the west, a bell began to toll. Not the hour bell, the alarm bell. Kaelin's hands stopped. His head came up. His whole body changed in an instant from lover to king. And he was at the door with his blade in his hand before Saoirse had drawn a full breath. "Stay," he said. He looked back at her once. His eyes were already the color of the lake under ice. "Please, stay here. Lock the door." He was gone. Gus rose from the rug, hackles up, and went to the door and whined. Saoirse stood with her hand pressed to her mouth, feeling the shape of his kiss still there, and the pulse in her chest, which was not hers, gave a single, small, satisfied throb. The throb of something that had just caused exactly what it had intended to cause. The bell was for the stables. A groom had been found dead. The story, by the time Saoirse learned it from Nyla the next morning, was that a border lord named Gaunt Merowyn, a brute of a man with a claim against the crown older than Kaelin's own father, had sent an assassin into the capital to kill the king's new bride before the presentation could take place, and the groom, coming back late from an errand, had seen the assassin and been killed for it. The assassin had been caught trying to climb the east wall. He had been Merowyn's man, there was no question. His cloak had Merowyn's sigil sewn inside the lining, the kind of mistake a man makes when he has been told to make sure he is identifiable in case of capture. Kaelin, when saoirse saw him at dawn, was furious in a way she had not yet seen him be, a cold, coiled fury that made the guards in the corridor step back as he passed. He came to her chamber. He knelt by the chair where she sat. He took her hands. "I will ride out tonight," he said. "I will take his keep before the moon is full. I will make an example of him that the border lords will not forget in 3 generations. You will be safe here. The capital is mine. My guard is doubled around you. Chanel has offered to sleep in the outer chamber personally. Raphael stays. You are not to leave the keep." He pressed her knuckles to his mouth. "I will come back to you in 4 days. We will finish what the bell interrupted. Do you understand me, saoirse?" She nodded because she could not do anything else, and she watched his eyes, and she tried, with everything she had, to say with her face what she could not say with her mouth. "Do not leave me alone with her." He did not read it. He was not looking for it. He was a king, with a man to hunt and a bride to protect, and he had just been handed the simplest possible story. An obvious brute with an obvious grudge and an obvious sigil, and his rage had a direction now, and he needed that direction. Because a king who does not know where to aim his rage is a king who turns it inward and tears himself apart. He left at dusk. She watched from the window. He looked up before he rode under the gate. He pressed his hand to his chest, over the place where, in the stories, the Bondhum lived, and she pressed her hand to the same place on her own body, and the thing under her palm that was not her pulse hummed back at him, and he smiled, because he did not know, and he was gone. Chanel came to her that night. She did not come as a counselor. She came as a friend. She brought a small pot of tea and 2 cups and a plate of honey cakes, and she sent the guard outside the door on an errand for fresh water. And she sat down opposite saoirse at the low table by the fire, and she poured the tea, and she said very gently, "You know, don't you? I wondered when you would. You are cleverer than I let myself hope." Saoirse did not move. Gus, who had been asleep on the rug, lifted his head and looked at Chanel and began, very low, to growl. Chanel did not look at him. She looked only at saoirse. "Please do not be frightened. I have no intention of harming you. I have spent 24 years keeping you alive, my dear. I went to your mother's bedside when you were 3 days old, and I laid the resonance into your chest, and I have been, in my way, your godmother ever since. I know that is not how it feels to you. I know you were raised unkindly. I tried, where I could, to make sure Isolde did not kill you outright, which is more than you perhaps realize. Drink the tea. It is only tea. I have no need to poison you. You are far more useful awake." Saoirse did not drink. Chanel sighed. "Very well. Let me tell you what you are then, so that you may choose, with full knowledge, what you become next. Kaelin's bloodline carries a bonding resonance that can only be answered by a specific frequency. For 3 generations, the frequency has not occurred naturally in any living woman. His father married without it and died mad. His grandfather the same. The line will fail inside a generation if Kaelin does not bond truly. I could not produce the frequency in a woman, but I could bind it, like a song to a jar, to a vessel. You were the vessel I found. A mute infant, No voice of her own to contaminate the resonance. A throat that would never be able to produce a competing tone. A body raised in obscurity, unlikely to be noticed, unlikely to be courted, unlikely to be ruined before the trial. I asked the moon for a vessel. The moon gave me you. Her eyes were wet. They were genuinely wet. This, Saoirse understood, was the most terrifying part. Chanel believed herself. I did not do this for me, child. I did it for him, for his father's house, for the kingdom. You were the price. You have, now, the rest of a queen's life in front of you. You will be loved. You will be safe. He will never know, and I will never tell him, so long as you do not. Sign the bond at the full moon. Bear his child. Live. That is all I ask. I will be at your side every day of your reign. I will counsel you as I counseled his mother. When you die, very old, in a bed surrounded by your grandchildren, I will be buried at your feet. Do you understand what I am offering you? Saoirse looked at her. Saoirse, who could not speak, who could not write fast enough, who could not, in this moment, do anything, did the only thing she could. She picked up the teacup, and very deliberately, she tipped it onto the floor. The tea spread across the stone. Gus barked once, sharp. Chanel's face did not change, but something behind it did. Ah, she said softly. You think you will tell him. She set down her own cup. My dear, he has gone to kill a border lord whose only crime, in truth, was being in my way. The assassin in the stable wore Merowyn's sigil because I sewed it into the lining myself. Kaelin will return in 4 days with Merowyn's head on a spear and a story the court will love. And you will stand beside him in silver and sing him a hymn your body cannot produce without me. And you will smile, because the alternative is that I touch this pin at my throat and the resonance I put in you goes quiet, forever. And when he reaches for you across a bed in 2 years, or 5, or 10, his wolf will find nothing to answer, and he will know, and he will never forgive you. Because by then he will have loved you, and the thing he loved will have been a lie. She stood. She smoothed her skirts. Sleep on it, child. I will be in the second door on the west corridor. When you decide, come to me. Do not be long. The moon is in 4 nights. She left. Gus went to the spilled tea and sniffed it and growled at it, and then came and pressed his small warm body against Saoirse's foot. And Saoirse sat in the firelit dark and understood, finally, that she had been born into a story that was not hers, and that the only way to make it hers was to end it. She did not sleep. She sat at the window and watched the moon rise a little fuller than the night before, and she thought. She thought the way she had always thought, which was silently, carefully, turning a problem the way she had once turned the hands of the dead to place them correctly in the shroud. She could not speak. She could not warn him by writer. Chanel controlled the correspondence. She could not leave the keep. The guard had been doubled with men Chanel had helped choose. She could not write a letter long enough to carry the truth before the pin at Chanel's throat did whatever the pin could do. She had 4 days. She had 4 days and a 3-legged dog and a best friend with flour on her sleeves, and she had the thing in her chest that was not hers. And, she realized slowly, she had one more thing. She had the fact that the thing in her chest was not all that was in her chest. There was something else. There had been something else all her life, underneath the bound resonance, quieter, older. hers. She had mistaken it for the silence. She had spent 24 years believing that where her voice should have been, there was only absence. And she understood now, sitting at the window with Gus's warm weight on her foot, that the absence had been a door, and behind the door was something Chanel had not put there, because Chanel had only put the resonance on top of it, and had not, perhaps, known what was underneath. She pressed her hand to her chest. She listened past the bound hum. She listened underneath. Far down, quiet, like a second heartbeat, something answered. It was warmer than the resonance. It felt, if she had to give it a shape, like light held inside a bell. It was, she thought, hers. She did not know what it was for yet, but she knew, with the certainty she had previously only ever felt about the dead, that it was hers, and that Chanel did not own it. That was where she would begin. In the morning, she sent Nyla to the library. She sent Nyla with a list. She could not speak the list, but she could, laboriously, write it. And Nyla could read anything Saoirse wrote, even if it was written left-handed and shaking. The list was small. It said, old bloodlines, mute-born, resonance, bindings, silver. Nyla read it. Nyla did not ask. Nyla said, "Give me the day." Nyla came back at dusk with 3 books and a face that had lost some of its color. "Saoirse," she said. She sat down heavily on the rug. Gus climbed into her lap uninvited. "Saoirse, there was a line, an old line. The Hollowvale name isn't just a pack name. It's older. It's a line of singers. Not singers like bards, singers like the ones the old tongue calls breath carriers. They weren't supposed to produce sound. They were supposed to channel it. The hymn you sang in Thornfinn, the way the air sang it instead of you, that's what they did. The whole line. They were wiped out 300 years ago in a purge because the kings before Caelin's bloodline were afraid of them. The books say the last of them was a child hidden in the border valleys. They say her descendants would not know what they were until one of them was made to sing. She looked up. "Saoirse, she didn't put the song in you. She unlocked it. And she told you she put it there because she needs you to believe she can take it back." Saoirse stared at her. The pulse in her chest, the one she had thought was not hers, went still for a moment, as if it had heard itself described and was embarrassed. The quieter thing underneath, the warm one, the bell, beat once, firmly, as if to say yes. She put her hand on Nyla's shoulder. Nyla nodded. "I know," she said. "I know. Okay, what do we do?" Saoirse pointed at the window, at the sky, at the moon that was fattening toward full. She held up 4 fingers, then 3, then 2, then 1. Nyla understood. 4 nights. The presentation. You want to do it there?" Saoirse nodded. "In front of the whole court." Saoirse nodded. "With her standing right there." Saoirse nodded. Nyla exhaled. Okay, all right. That's dramatic. I like it. I'd like it more if we had a plan that didn't involve you standing in front of a woman who can, apparently, switch off your heartbeat at will. But I accept that we are working with what we have." She chewed her lip. "You'll need a way to make him listen past the resonance, past the one she bound. He has to hear the other one, the real one, before she realizes what you're doing." Saoirse nodded again. She pointed to her chest. She pointed to Caelin's cloak still hanging on the peg by the door. She pointed to her throat and shook her head. Then she cupped her hand, open, and brought it up, slow, as if lifting water. The air. She would use the air, the way she had in Thornfen. Not the bound song this time, the one beneath. She would let the one beneath sing, and Chanel would not be able to silence it because Chanel had not put it there and did not know the shape of it. Nyla's eyes filled. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. I believe you. I believe you, saoirse Hollowvale, breath carrier, queen of nothing and everything. Tell me what I do." Saoirse wrote on the parchment, "When he returns, bring him to me before she does. Alone, any way you can." Nyla read it. Nyla folded the parchment into her sleeve. "Consider it done," she said. "I have been making eyes at Raphael for 4 days for exactly this sort of emergency." She left to find him. Saoirse stayed at the window. Gusts settled across her feet. The moon rose one night closer to full. Kaelin returned on the evening of the 4th day, a day earlier than expected, with Merowyn's banner reversed on a spear and blood dried into the scar on his jaw, and an exhaustion in his shoulders that only left him when he stepped into her chamber and saw her. He crossed the room in 3 strides. He did not speak. He took her face in his hands, and he looked at her as if confirming she was whole. And then he rested his forehead against hers, and his breath shook out of him, and he said, "I missed you. I did not know I could miss anyone this much. I am sorry. I am so sorry it took 4 days." Behind him, in the doorway, Raphael stood with his arms folded, nodding at Nyla. Nyla closed the door. She locked it. She stood in front of it with her back to the wood like a woman guarding a vault. Saoirse lifted her hand. She placed it on Kaelin's chest, over the scar on his collarbone, over the place where his own Bontum lived. She tapped, lightly, 3 times. She had taught him this on the 2nd night. It was the sign for listen. He stilled. "Listen," he said. He drew back enough to see her face. "I am listening." She stepped back from him. She lifted her hand again and she touched her own chest. And she made, with her mouth, a shape he had seen before, which was the word no. She touched her chest again. She made the shape again. No. Not mine. She saw his brow furrow. She pointed to the west corridor, to the 2nd door. She made the shape of the word mother because it was the closest shape she had for counselor, for godmother, for the woman who had been in his house since he was a boy. She made the shape of the word pin. She tapped her chest again, harder. No, not mine. She could see him trying to keep up, and she could see him beginning, slowly, to understand. And she could see, under the understanding, the terrible thing she had been afraid of, which was not disbelief, but the first wound of betrayal, landing in a place he had not yet had time to armor. "Chanel," he said. Not a question, a checking. She nodded. "The song in Thornfen. You are telling me," he swallowed. "You are telling me she put it in you." Saoirse held up her hand. She wobbled it, yes and no. She shook her head. She tapped her chest again, lower this time, lower than the bound resonance, and she closed her eyes, and she listened, the way she had taught herself to listen these last 3 nights, past the hum Chanel had placed there, down to the warm bell underneath, and she let it, for the first time in her life, rise. The air in the chamber changed. It did not sing the hymn. It sang something older, something without words, A single sustained note that seemed to come from the stones themselves, low and warm and unmistakably alive. Kalen went very still. His eyes changed. The ice lake color darkened. His nostrils flared. His wolf, she understood, was sitting up inside him and listening the way a dog listens to a whistle only it can hear. That, he said slowly, is a different sound. She nodded, eyes still closed. The note held. She let it hold. Then, with effort, she let it go. The air went quiet. She opened her eyes. She was trembling. He caught her before she fell. Sit down, saoirse, look at me. He guided her to the chair. He knelt in front of her. His face was the face of a man who had just been handed a map of his own house that showed rooms he had never seen. The hymn in Thornfen, that was the bound one, the one she put in you. This one, the one you just made, this is yours. She nodded, and she does not know about this one. She nodded again, and she wrote on the parchment Nyla passed her, the rest, the vessel, the cradle, the pin, the frequency, the line of hollowvale breath carriers the old kings had tried to erase, the decoy she had sent him to kill, the presentation tomorrow night, the plan. He read twice. His jaw worked. His hands, when he set the parchment down, were shaking very faintly, the way his shoulders had shaken in the Thornfen Hall when he had first knelt. She raised me, he said, to the floor. She held me when my mother died. She taught me how to hold a pen. He stopped. He breathed. He lifted his head. His eyes, when they met Saoirse's, were no longer the color of a lake under ice. They were the color of a lake when the ice breaks. You. His voice was low and absolutely steady. Not the song she put in you. You. Your line. Your breath. That is what I heard in Thornfen, underneath. That is what my wolf went to his knees for. Do you understand me, Saoirse? She did not give you to me. You were already mine. She only tried to collect a fee. She lifted her hand. She touched his face. She traced the scar on his jaw. He closed his eyes and leaned into her palm. Tomorrow night, he said, we do it her way, up to the last moment. You walk in on my arm, you stand in the circle. She will want to be close, to hold the pin. Let her be close. When I give you the sign, you do what you just did, the real one, not the bound one. Let the room hear you. I will handle her. He opened his eyes. I will not kill her in front of you unless I have to. I will try for exile. You have my word. Saoirse nodded. She did not want him to kill her. She did not want, she realized, to kill anyone at all. She wanted to be, for the first time in her life, a person a king had not had to kneel for, who could stand in a room and not be a price paid. She could, she thought, become that person tomorrow. If the underneath song held, if her body held, if the warm bell under her ribs was enough. The presentation hall had been dressed in silver. Every candle was a white candle. Every banner was the Draventhorn wolf with its mouth closed. The court filled the hall in a pressure of silk and scent, and Saoirse walked in on Kalen's arm in a gown the color of moonlight on snow. And Nyla, as lady-in-waiting, walked 2 paces behind, with Gus at her heel, in a small, ridiculous collar of silver thread, because Gus had refused to be left in any chamber, anywhere, for any amount of time. Chanel Varamain stood at the foot of the dais in emerald and silver, and her pin was at her throat, and her hand was light against it already, a counselor's habitual gesture, a woman thinking. She smiled at Saoirse. Saoirse smiled back. The smile cost her everything she had. Caelin's hand covered hers on his arm. He squeezed once. Steady. They climbed the dais. The high priest of the capital stood between them, old and half-blind, with the bonding bowl in his hands, and he began the ancient words, and the court began to settle into the ceremony. And Saoirse kept her eyes on the priest and not on Chanel, because she did not trust her face. The priest spoke. Caelin answered. The priest turned to Saoirse. He asked the question he had asked 1,000 brides. She could not answer him with her mouth. She answered him by opening her palm above the bowl and letting the warm bell under her ribs very faintly hum. The water in the bowl rippled. The priest blinked. He had, she understood, felt that. He nodded slowly and accepted it as a yes. Chanel's hand at her throat stilled. Her eyes moved the smallest degree to Saoirse's chest, and Saoirse felt the bound resonance, the one she had been ignoring, give a hard, insistent pull like a leash yanked. Caelin beside her tightened his grip on her hand. Now, he breathed, so quietly only she would hear. She let go. She closed her eyes. She reached, past the bound hum, down to the warm bell. She let it rise. The air in the hall changed. It was not the hymn this time. It was the older note, the one without words, and it came up through the floor and out through the rafters and around the candles, and every candle in the hall bent its flame once, in unison, toward her. The court went absolutely still. Caelin stepped back half a pace. He did it so that the court would see him stepping back, so that they would see that the king was not supporting the sound, so that they would see that the sound was hers. The note lifted higher. The warm bell rang open. Saoirse felt, for the first time in her life, a power that was not borrowed. It answered her the way a creature answers a person who has fed it every day of their life without knowing they were doing it. It answered her emotion, not her command. She thought, quite clearly, protect him. And the note bent around Caelin like light bending around a stone. She thought, show me what is wrong here. And the note reached and found, at the throat of Chanel Varamain, the small silver pin. Chanel's hand was already on it. She had been waiting. She pressed. Saoirse felt the bound resonance in her chest try to collapse inward, the way a hand closes around a candle to snuff it. It pulled. It dragged. It would, she understood with a clinical clarity that surprised her, have taken her heart with it, if her heart had been the thing it was tied to. But her heart was not the thing it was tied to. The warm bell was, and the warm bell was hers. The bound resonance collapsed. It collapsed around nothing. It fell out of her like a coat falling off a peg, and the pin at Chanel's throat, having been tuned to that exact frequency for 24 years, had nowhere to put what it was holding. It kept pulling. It kept pulling at what it had been bound to. It found, in the hall, only one throat that still carried the signature of its old work, which was the throat of the woman who had wrought it, and it pulled there. Chanel's eyes went very wide. She made a small sound. Her hand, still pressed to the pin, began to shake, and she could not lower it because the pin would not let her. The court gasped. Caelin moved. "Take her hand off the pin," he said to Raphael, who was already moving. "Do not let her die here. She will answer for this in a court, not in a hall." Raphael reached for Chanel. Saoirse, without thinking, let the warm bell go a fraction brighter. She thought, live, because she did not want a death in the hall, not her first night, not at the end of a hymn, not in front of a king who had already lost too many of his own. The bell brightened. The pin under the light of it cracked. It did not cut Chanel's throat. It fell in 2 pieces onto the silver floor, and Chanel sagged forward into Raphael's arms, alive, pale, shaking, her whole face the face of a craftsman who has watched her life's work break itself into honest pieces in front of her. The warm bell in Saoirse's chest dimmed. She was, she realized, about to fall. Kaelin caught her. He caught her before her knees had finished remembering they were knees. He lifted her into his arms in front of the entire court, and he did not say anything for a long moment, because he did not need to. Because the hall had seen what the hall had seen, and the Draventhorn wolves along the walls with their closed mouths looked, in the candlelight, as if they were smiling. "Witness," Kaelin said quietly to the priest. "Witness that she is my queen by her own voice and no other. Witness that the claim made in Thornfen is confirmed here, not by the song that was placed in her, but by the song that was always hers. Witness that Chanel Voramain is taken into custody for the crime of binding an infant against her will, and for the deaths committed in preparation of this rite, including the man in my own stable." The priest, trembling, witnessed. The court, trembling, witnessed. Chanel, in Raphael's arms, lifted her head. Her eyes found Saoirse's. They were not kind now. They were not cruel either. They were, for the first time, the eyes of a woman seeing another woman, plainly, without a use attached. "I did not know," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "I did not know there was a song underneath. Forgive me, I thought I had made you. I see now I only uncovered you. That is worse." Saoirse, in Kaelin's arms, lifted her hand. She did not have the strength to write. She did not have the voice to speak. She did the only thing she could. She nodded, once, the way she had nodded at the dead when she closed their eyes. It was not forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. It was enough. Chanel bowed her head. Raphael took her away. The hall exhaled. Spring came late that year to Caer Draventhorn, and when it came all at once. The snow on the bluff melted in a single week. The river under the walls ran high and silver. The gardens, which had been bones when Saoirse had first walked them, put up green so thick the gardeners complained happily to anyone who would listen. Chanel Voramain had been exiled to a stone house on a northern island with a staff of 3 and an allowance of books and no access to silver. And Kaelin had gone once to see her, and had come back and had not spoken of the visit, but had held Saoirse through the night without letting go, and Saoirse had understood and had not asked. Iseult in Thornfen had been stripped of her position and her house, and had been given a small cottage on the pack's edge and the right to live out her life in it, because Saoirse had asked, in writing, that she not be killed, and Kaelin had honored it, because Saoirse had asked. Nyla had married Raphael in the keep gardens in a small, loud ceremony in which Gus had been the ring-bearer, and had lost one of the rings and had been forgiven instantly. The border lords had sent tribute and apologies, and, in the case of Merowyn's heir, a very cautious request to be allowed to keep the family keep, which Kaelin had granted because Merowyn the Elder, it turned out, had not known about the assassin in his cloak, and his son was a decent man who liked horses. The capital had found, in its new queen, a figure easy to love. She did not speak. She did not need to. She walked the markets in the mornings and touched the shoulders of the old and the hands of the children. And the children, who had been told she could not speak and who therefore did not expect her to, chattered at her in run-on sentences about the weather and the cats and the price of plums. And she listened to all of it. And the old women said approvingly that a queen who listened was worth 10 who lectured. Saoirse sat on a morning in late spring in the garden that had belonged to Caelin's mother, on a stone bench warmed by the sun, with Gus asleep on her foot, and a basket of bread beside her, and her hand resting lightly on the small new curve of her belly. Caelin came out from the council chamber in his shirt sleeves, because the capital had discovered that the king did not wear his coat in his own garden, and he sat down beside her, and he put his arm around her shoulders, and he looked down at her hand on her belly and said, softly, "How is he today?" She shrugged. She smiled. She tapped her chest twice, low, calm. He kissed her temple. Good. Let him stay calm. I don't want a son who kicks in meetings. He was quiet for a while. A bird sang in the apple tree. Gus sighed. Nyla tells me, Caelin said carefully, that the babe hummed yesterday when you were baking. Saoirse nodded. She had felt it. It had been small. It had been the warm bell, small and new, a little one inside her. Hers and his, hers and hers. Hers alone first and then his second, the right order this time. She was not afraid of it. She had been afraid in the early months that whatever was in her would be passed down as something that could be bound again. She did not fear it anymore. She had decided, with the kind of decision a breath carrier makes and does not need to write down, that the line of Hollowvale would be known from this child forward, not hidden, and that any child of hers who hummed would hum out loud, and the kingdom would learn to listen. Caelin pressed his forehead to her temple. Saoirse, he said, the way he had said it the first time in the chamber in Thornfen, with reverence and with fear of mispronouncing it. I am going to ask you something I did not ask properly the first time, because a king claiming a queen in front of his court is not asking. I want to ask it now. He shifted. He took her hand from her belly. He turned it palm up in his, the way he had done in the antechamber that first night. His palm, under hers, was open. In offering, no ask. Will you stay with me? Not because the hymn said so, not because your line did, because you want to, as long as you want to. And when you do not, I will let you go, and I will grieve, and I will not stop you. Saoirse, will you stay? She looked at him for a long time. The warm bell under her ribs hummed, very softly, yes. She did not need to use it. She lifted her hand. She placed it, palm flat, against his chest, over the place where his own bond hum lived, the place she had taught him she meant when she said listen. She tapped, lightly, 3 times. Then she did not take her hand away. He closed his eyes. He bent his head. Gus, at their feet, opened one eye, saw no threat, and went back to sleep. And that, if you have been listening, is the story of how the only mute-born wolf in the Thornfen pack became the queen of Caer Dreventhorn, and of how the song that was meant to bind her became the song that freed her, and of how a king who had gone to his knees in a hall for a voice he did not yet understand learned, eventually, to stand beside the woman the voice belonged to. I would like, if you will, to know what you thought of it. Rate it for me if you would, 1 to 10 in the comments below, and tell me which moment landed hardest for you, because I read every one. And if you would like more stories like this, of fated mates and cursed kings and quiet girls who turn out to be the loudest thing in the room, then do me the kindness of subscribing to the channel, because there is another one coming, and I would very much like you to be there when it begins.